Dolomite Mountains of northern Italy, a crown of jagged limestone peaks, emerald valleys, and rivers that have patiently carved through stone for millennia, possess a hauntingly beautiful landscape. Yet, in the heart of this breathtaking geography, within the steep and narrow gorge of the Vajont River, stands a massive monument representing the darkest intersection of human genius. Their high concrete wall. At the time of its completion, it was the world's tallest, thin-arched dam, a flawless masterpiece of engineering. Even today, it remains among the tallest in the world. But Vajont is not a dam that holds back water. It is a ghost dam, housing behind its slender curve the wreckage of an entire mountain, a gargantuan graveyard of earth and stone. This is the story of how an engineering marvel refused to break under the relentless power of nature, while the 2,000 innocent lives it was meant to serve were erased from the map in a mere 15 minutes. This is the tragedy of a dam that survived and a mountain that walked. In the 1950s, Italy was a nation in a desperate hurry, emerging from the destruction of World War II and experiencing a period of rapid industrialization known as the economic miracle. To fuel the factories of Milan, Turin, and Venice, the demand for electricity was insatiable. Eyes turned to the deep valleys of the Alps where the hydroelectric potential was immense. One of Italy's most powerful private monopolies, Società Adriatica di Elettricità, SADE, set its sights on the Vajont Valley. This gorge was a geographer's dream and a builder's nightmare, incredibly deep and impossibly narrow. The lead designer, Carlo Semenza, envisioned a thin arc dam, a structure that would transfer the immense pressure of the water not through its own weight, but like a tensed bow into the rugged rock walls of the canyon itself. It was the pinnacle of mid-century modernism, elegant, efficient, daring, and dangerously ambitious. When construction began in 1957, the graceful concrete curve rising toward the sky became a symbol of Italian prestige and humanity's perceived dominance over nature. Engineers and politicians beamed with pride as they built the world's tallest, thin-arched dam. Yet, just beneath the surface, the Earth was whispering repeated warnings, but these whispers were deliberately ignored for the sake of profit and national pride. On the southern bank of the Vajont Valley, directly above the reservoir, loomed a mountain called Monte Toc. For the villagers of Erto and Casso living in the dam's shadow, the name was no mystery. In their local dialect, Toc meant peace or rotten. Generations had lived on its slopes and knew that the mountain was not a solid mass of rock, but a precarious heap of ancient landslide debris, clay layers, and unstable fragments. As Said completed the dam and began filling the reservoir in 1960, the rotten mountain began to wake up. A fundamental law of hydroelectric engineering was at work. Water is heavy and incredibly invasive. When a valley is turned into a massive lake, the water does not simply sit at the bottom, it seeps into the deep cracks, fissures, and layers of the surrounding slopes. At Vajont, this water acted as the ultimate lubricant, reaching hidden prehistoric clay layers deep within Monte Toc. Clay, when saturated, becomes a slick, frictionless surface. The rising reservoir water effectively turned these layers into a massive slide, reactivating an enormous, dormant landslide mass that had rested there for millions of years. In November 1960, a massive chunk of earth, roughly 700,000 Myo-3, slid into the lake with a deafening roar. This was nature's clear warning shot. The company's own geologists, including the designer's son Edoardo Semenza and the world-renowned Austrian rock mechanics expert Leopold Müller, recognized the severity of the situation. Their investigations revealed that it wasn't just a small piece of the mountain moving, but the entire slope, a colossal mass of approximately 200 million mph moving as a single block. This was a landslide threat of unprecedented scale. The engineers faced a terrifying dilemma: either halt the project, empty the reservoir, and accept a massive financial and prestige loss, or attempt to tame the mountain. Hubris triumphed over logic. They believed they could manage nature as if it were a hydraulic machine. Said's engineers believed they could control the mountain's movement by manipulating water levels. Their theory suggested that if they raised the water level very slowly, the mountain would creep harmlessly into the lake and eventually stabilize itself. If the movement became too aggressive, they would lower the level to reduce pressure. For 3 years, they played this deadly game of Russian roulette. They raised the water, watched the mountain move millimeter by millimeter, and lowered it when the speed increased. They convinced themselves that this controlled slide was safe. But while they focused on their gauges and graphs, a journalist named Tina Merlin was looking at the people. Merlin was the only voice shouting the truth. She reported on the massive cracks appearing in the walls of houses in Erto, trees tilting like drunken soldiers, and the terrifying groans coming from deep within the earth. Sade sued her for spreading false news and disturbing the public peace. Merlin was eventually acquitted, but the company's powerful propaganda machine had already convinced the public that the dam was perfectly safe. By the summer of 1963, Monte Toc had reached a point of no return. Years of fluctuating water levels had utterly compromised the mountain's internal structure. The sliding speed had accelerated from millimeters to centimeters a day. By the last weeks of September, the mountain was moving at 20 centimeters a day. In early October, it reached 74 centimeters a day. The engineers finally realized catastrophe was imminent and began a panicked, rapid lowering of the water level. However, they were about to pay a heavy price for reducing natural sciences to mere mathematical formulas. Rapidly lowering the water created an imbalance in the pore pressure within the mountain. The water inside the slope could not escape as fast as the water in the lake was being withdrawn, creating a hydraulic pressure that finally severed the mountain's hold on that thin clay layer. The giant was awake, and no force on Earth could stop it. October 9, 1963, was a clear, moonlit, and cool autumn night. Below the dam, where the riverbed widened, life in the town of Longarone was flowing with its usual vibrancy. Longarone, with its bustling squares and ice cream shops, was the social heart of the valley. That night, the bars and cafes were packed. People had gathered to watch the European Cup football match between Real Madrid and Glasgow Rangers. Since televisions were not yet common in every home, these matches were major social events. Up at the dam crest, Sade engineers waited in tense anticipation. They knew the mountain would slide that night, but their flawed computer models and incorrect calculations told them it would be a slow event, creating a wave perhaps 20 or 30 meters high. They stayed in the control room atop the dam wall to watch. They warned the few houses on the reservoir shoreline to evacuate, but saw no need to warn the thousands of people living on the valley floor in the dam's shadow. At exactly 10:39 p.m., Monte Toc simply gave up. It didn't slide, it collapsed. In just 45 seconds, roughly 260 million ma3 of rock, earth, and forest, twice the volume of the water in the lake, crashed into the reservoir at a staggering speed of 110 km/h. The impact was so violent that the shock wave was recorded as a small earthquake by seismographs as far away as Brussels and London. The water had only one direction to go, up. The displaced water created a mega-tsunami of unprecedented proportions. Part of the wave surged up the opposite slope, erasing the lower parts of Casso and Erto. But the true apocalypse was the mass of water heading toward the dam. Approximately $50 million of water rose into a wall 250 meters high, reaching a height equivalent to the dam itself. Here lies the most chilling detail of the Vajont story. Carlos Semenza's thin arch dam was so perfectly built that it did not break. The dam wall held firm, acting as a massive launch ramp for the 50 million kilo 2 tons of water. The water plummeted into the narrow Vajont Gorge with unimaginable acceleration. It moved with such mass and speed that it compressed the air in front of it. The first thing that killed the people of Longarone was not water. It was a supersonic aero-pressure wave, equivalent to the shock wave of a nuclear explosion. This wind blast shattered buildings, blew off roofs, and literally tore people apart before the water even touched them. The wind was so fierce it ripped the clothes off the victims' bodies. Seconds later, the water arrived. It was no longer just water, but a black, liquefied wall of destruction, a slurry of massive boulders, mud, uprooted trees, and concrete blocks. This wall of debris hit Longarone, Pirago, Rivalta, Villanova, and Fay in a matter of seconds. The valley floor wasn't flooded. It was struck by a blow that flattened everything. In less than 15 minutes, a vibrant, historic Italian town was erased from the face of the earth. Schools, churches, homes, and bars, none survived. All that remained was a flat, gray, muddy silence. When the sun rose the next morning, the world faced a scene of unimaginable horror. Nearly 2,000 people were dead. Entire families, generations, and the collective memory of a town had vanished in a single night. Rescue teams found almost no one to save. The victims were either buried under meters of thick mud or swept kilometers downstream into the Piave River. Amidst this carnage stood the Vajont Dam, towering over the ruins, structurally intact and perfectly white. Aside from a few scratches on its crest, it was unscathed. Humans had built a structure capable of surviving the impact of a mountain and a tsunami, but everything it was meant to protect had been destroyed beneath it. The dam had outlived the civilization it was built to power. The years following the disaster were filled with agonizing trials and endless bureaucratic hurdles. SAD and the Italian government initially claimed the event was a natural disaster or an act of God. But Tina Merlin's reporting and the work of independent geologists proved otherwise. Warnings had been systematically ignored, data manipulated, and risks suppressed to avoid losing state subsidies. Eventually, several engineers were convicted of manslaughter, but for the survivors of Longarone, no prison sentence could restore their history. Today, the Vajont Dam remains a silent monument to hubris and system failure. If you walk across its crest today, you won't see a blue lake. Instead, you will see a flat, green floor of forest and shrubs, the remains of Monte Toc that filled the reservoir in seconds. The Vajont tragedy is the ultimate proof that reducing natural sciences to mathematical equations and ignoring local knowledge is fatal. It serves as a reminder that an engineering marvel is a failure if it is built in isolation from the reality of its environment. Vajont is a devastating witness to the fact that while we can build walls to hold back water, we can never truly master the earth beneath our feet.